There is a man turning a millstone in the dark. His head is shaved, his wrists are wrapped in bronze. Where his eyes used to be, there are only wounds that have not finished healing. He walks in a slow circle, pushing a wooden beam, grinding grain for people who paid to watch him fall. You can hear the stone drag. You can hear him breathe. And if you were standing in that prison in the city of Gaza, you would never guess that this broken man was once the strongest human being who ever lived. We will come back to him, but not yet, because this is the end of the story. And to understand how a man like that ends up blind and chained in the dark, you have to go back, 300 years back, to a nation that had everything. They had just been handed a land, rivers, hills, cities they did not build, and vineyards they did not plant. God had carried them out of slavery, split a sea down the middle, fed them in a desert for 40 years, and set them down in a home of their own. All they had to do was remember who gave it to them. They forgot. And what happened next is one of the strangest, darkest, most human stretches in the entire Bible. It is a book called Judges, and most people read it like a highlight reel, a lineup of heroes, one after another, each riding in to save the day. That is not what this book is. This is not a story about heroes. This is not a story about a golden age. This is not a story about a nation slowly climbing toward the light. This is the story of a nation forgetting God, quietly, gradually, one leader at a time, until the light very nearly went out for good. The Hebrew word for the people in this book is shaphat. We translate it judge, and that word fools us. We picture a courtroom, a robe, a gavel, but a shaphat was not a courtroom judge. A shaphat was a rescuer, a warlord, a deliverer. God raised up in an emergency to pull his people back from the edge. There are around a dozen of them. And here's the part nobody tells you. They do not get better, they get worse. Each rescuer God sends is more cracked than the one before, until the last and most famous of them all is the man in the dark, turning that millstone with no eyes left to weep. This is the story of how that happened. To understand the men and women in this book, you have to understand the cycle, because everything in Judges runs on it. It goes like this. The people forget God and start worshiping the idols of the nations around them. So God lifts his hand of protection, and an enemy moves in and grinds them down. After years of misery, they finally cry out, and God, every single time, even though they earned none of it, sends a rescuer. The rescuer wins. The land has peace. And then the moment that rescuer dies, the people forget again, and the whole thing starts over. Sin, suffering, crying out, rescue, peace, forgetting. Round and round. You will watch it turn again and again before this is over. That is the engine of this entire book, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. The first man God raises up is named Othniel. You have probably never heard a sermon about him, and that is exactly the point. Othniel is almost boring. He is faithful, he is clean, he goes to war, he wins, and the land has rest for 40 years. There is no scandal here, no tragic flaw, no dark turn. He is the closest thing this book has to a hero without a shadow. Remember him, because he is the ruler by which all the others will be measured, and not one of them, in all the years you are about to watch, will measure up. The second rescuer is a man named Ehud, and with him, the blood starts. Israel is being crushed by Moab, and Moab's king is a man named Eglon, enormously fat, the text tells us bluntly. Ehud is left-handed, from the tribe of Benjamin, and he uses that against them. He forges a short sword, straps it to his right thigh where no guard would ever think to check, and requests a private meeting with the king. "I have a secret message for you," he says. Eglon rises, and Ehud drives the blade in so deep that the fat closes over the handle. Then he slips out, locks the doors behind him, and the guards wait, and wait, too embarrassed to interrupt their king, until Ehud is long gone. It is violent. It is almost darkly funny, and it tells you something has already shifted. The rescues are getting bloodier, stranger, more personal. Then comes the high point of the whole book, and it belongs to a woman. Her name is Deborah. She is a prophet, and she is judging Israel, sitting under a palm tree while people come to her for God's word. When the northern tribes are being crushed by a general named Sisera and his 900 iron chariots, it is Deborah who hears from God. She calls a man named Barak and tells him, "Go, God has handed you the victory." And here's what most people miss. Barak, the soldier, the man with the sword, hesitates. He will only go if Deborah comes with him, so she does. But she tells him the honor of the day will not go to him. It will go to a woman, and it does. The battle breaks. Sisera runs on foot and hides in the tent of a woman named Jael, who gives him milk, covers him with a blanket, and waits until he falls asleep exhausted. Then she takes a tent peg and a hammer, kneels beside him, and drives the peg through his temple into the ground. The greatest victory in the book of Judges is won by two women, a prophet who had to lead because the men would not, and a woman with a tent peg who finished what an army could not. Stay with me, because you should feel the ground tilting under this. Othniel was clean, Ehud was cunning and violent, and by the time we reach Deborah, the men God is supposed to be raising up are already hesitating, already stepping back, already needing to be carried. The rescuers have not gotten stronger. The nation has not gotten holier. The peace lasts a little while, and then the forgetting comes again, right on schedule. Because that is the terrible rhythm of this book. Every time you think a good ruler has finally fixed things, the last line of the chapter tells you the land had rest for 40 years. And then that ruler died, and it all fell apart again. The cycle is not a circle. Watch closely. It is a spiral. And it is going down, So keep your eyes on the bottom, because that is where we are headed. Stop for 1 second, because I need to say something before we go down into the dark half of this book. Everything you have seen so far was the good part. Othniel, Ehud, Deborah. That was the top of the spiral. From here, the rescuers get more broken, the sin gets more shocking, and the nation falls further than you think a nation can fall. If stories like this, the ones the highlight reels skip, are why you are here, subscribe before we go on, so the next one finds you. And while you are at it, here's a question to sit with as we keep going. Which of these judges feels the most like you? The clean one, the cunning one, or the ones we have not met yet, the ones who had everything and threw it away? Hold that thought. We come back to it at the end. The next rescuer God chooses is hiding in a hole. His name is Gideon, and when we meet him, he is threshing wheat inside a wine press, down in a pit, out of sight, because he is terrified the Midianites will find his food and take it. This is the man God picks, and I want you to hold on to that, because it matters. The angel who finds him says the most almost comical thing in the book. The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. Mighty man of valor. Crouched in a pit, hiding. Gideon does not believe it. He argues. He says his clan is the weakest in his tribe, and he is the least in his family. Then he asks God to prove himself, not once, but again and again. He lays out a wool fleece and asks God to make it wet while the ground stays dry. God does it. Then Gideon asks him to do the opposite the next morning, just to be sure. God does that too. You would think that would be enough for anyone. For Gideon, it is not, and God is patient with all of it. He shrinks Gideon's army from 32,000 men down to 300, so that when the victory comes, no one can pretend they won it themselves. 300 men, torches hidden in clay jars, surrounding a valley in the dark. They smash the jars all at once. The light explodes, the trumpets scream, and an entire enemy army panics and destroys itself. It is one of the great rescues in the Bible. And if the story ended there, you would remember Gideon as one of the good ones. And then Gideon does something that poisons everything. The people beg him to be their king. He says no. He says the right words, that God alone is their king. But then he asks each of them for a piece of gold from the plunder. He melts it down and makes an object called an ephod, a kind of priestly emblem, and he sets it up in his hometown. And the text says all Israel came and worshipped it there. It became a snare to Gideon and to his whole house. Do you see what just happened? The rescuer became the reason they fell. The man who tore down his father's idol built a new one with his own hands. That is the spiral. It is no longer the pagan nations dragging Israel down. Now it is the rescuers themselves. And it gets darker. Gideon had many sons. After he dies, one of them, a man named Abimelech, decides he wants the throne his father refused. So he hires a gang of reckless men, goes to his father's house, and murders his own brothers, 70 of them, on a single stone. Only the youngest, Jotham, escapes by hiding. Read that again because you will want to look away. A son of one of God's rescuers slaughters 70 of his own brothers to crown himself king. There is no enemy nation here, nothing you can blame on the outside. This is Israel doing this to Israel. And it ends the way blood always ends in this book. Abimelech dies in shame, his skull crushed by a millstone a woman drops from a tower, begging his armor-bearer to finish him so no one can say a woman killed him. Here is where I need to be honest with you about how this book is built. When people say there were 12 judges, they are counting a tradition more than a text. Alongside the famous ones, the book lists several rulers we know almost nothing about. Tola, Jair, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, a verse or two each, a name, a number of years, a note about how many sons or donkeys they had, and then they are gone. The Bible does not hide them, but it does not tell their stories either. So when I walk you through the great judges, know that the quiet ones are there in the background, holding the same collapsing line, which brings us to the most heartbreaking rescuer of them all. His name is Jephthah, and life marked him from the start. He was the son of a prostitute, and his half-brothers drove him out of the family so he would get no inheritance. He became the leader of a band of outlaws in the wilderness. And then, of course, when Israel was desperate and being crushed again, the very people who threw him out came crawling back and begged him to lead them. He agreed. And on the way to battle, terrified and desperate to win, Jephthah made a vow. He told God that if he came home victorious, he would sacrifice whatever came out of his door first to greet him. He won the battle, and the first thing that came out of his door, dancing with tambourines to celebrate her father's victory, was his daughter, his only child. Stay with me, because this is the weight the book wants you to feel. The Bible does not tell this story to praise the vow. It tells it to show you how far Israel had drifted. So far that a rescuer of God's people would think a rash promise had to be kept with his own child. So far that no one around him seemed to know God any better. The stakes started small. One man against an enemy, then a family, then a city burning, and now a father standing in his doorway, watching his daughter walk toward him, understanding what he has done. The spiral is almost at the bottom now, and the man waiting for us there is the one we started with, in the dark, at the mill, in Gaza. His name is Samson, and before he was ever born, he was set apart. An angel came to his mother, who could not have children, and told her she would have a son, and that this son would belong to God in a special way. He was to be a Nazirite. The Hebrew is Nazir, and it means set apart, consecrated, dedicated. It came with 3 rules he was never to break: no wine, no touching anything dead, and never, ever cut his hair. His long hair was the visible sign of a life given wholly to God. And here is something the pictures always get wrong. You have seen the pictures. Samson as a mountain of muscle, arms like tree trunks, a bodybuilder tearing through whole armies. But read the text. It never describes his body at all. His strength was never in his muscles. It was the Spirit of God rushing on him, tied to that vow, tied to that hair. That is the whole reason the Philistines were so desperate to learn his secret, because you cannot look at Samson and see where the power comes from. If it were muscle, they would have just seen it. Samson had everything: a calling from before birth, strength no enemy could match, God's own hand on his life. And he threw it away piece by piece for the thing he could not say no to. He wanted the wrong women, again and again. He touched the dead when it suited him. He treated the holiest vow a person could take like it was a game. And still, this is the mercy in it, God kept using him anyway, until Delilah. The Philistine lords paid her to find the secret of his strength. And Samson, who should have run, stayed. She asked him. He lied. She tried to trap him. It failed. She asked again. He lied again. Over and over she wore him down, until finally, exhausted by her, he told her the truth. It is in my hair. Cut it, and I am like any other man. She waited until he slept on her knees. Then she called a man to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And when the Philistines came, Samson woke and went to fight them the way he always had. And the text says the saddest sentence in his whole story. He did not know that the Lord had left him. They seized him. They gouged out his eyes. They bound him with bronze and threw him into the prison at Gaza. And they put him to work turning a millstone in the dark. And now you know who the man at the beginning was. The strongest man who ever lived, blind, shaved, chained, grinding grain for the people who broke him while they laughed at the God he was supposed to serve. That is where the spiral bottoms out, the bottom you were told at the start to watch for. Not just for Samson, but for the whole nation he stands for. A people meant to be set apart, meant to be a light, now blind and enslaved and mocked in the dark, because they could not stop reaching for the very things that destroyed them. But look closer at that prison floor, because the text drops one quiet line, almost in passing. His hair began to grow back. They held a festival to their god Dagon to celebrate. 3,000 of them packed the temple, on the roof and the floor, and they called for Samson to be brought out so they could mock him. A servant led the blind man in by the hand and stood him between the two central pillars that held the whole building up. And Samson prayed. Not a grand prayer, a broken one. O Lord God, remember me. Please strengthen me only this once. Only this once. After a whole life of wasting it. Only this once. You can hear it, can't you? A man at the very end of himself. He put one hand on each pillar. He pushed. And the temple came down on everyone in it and on himself. And the text says he killed more in his death than in all his life. I want you to sit in that because it is the whole book in one image. Here's a man who had everything and lost all of it. Blind, chained, his own fault, every step of the way. And God still answered. God still used the ruin. Grace reached all the way down to the bottom of the spiral and did not stop at the door of the prison. Josephus, the Jewish historian writing not long after the time of Jesus, records this same death. The blind strong man, the pillars, the temple. As real history his readers already knew. This was never just a legend to the people closest to it. And maybe you already know the shape of what you just watched. Because the cycle in this book is not ancient at all. It is the promise you make at 3 in the morning. This time I will be different. This time I will not go back. And the quiet ache a few weeks later when you are right back where you started. Sin, suffering, crying out, rescue, forgetting, round and round. You have lived this. So had they. The book of Judges is not a museum. It is a mirror. So what do you take away from a book this dark? 3 things. First, the judges never actually saved Israel. I want you to sit with that. Not one of them fixed the real problem. They beat back the Midianites and the Moabites and the Philistines, and the land had rest for a while, but the enemy was never really Moab. The enemy was the human heart that kept forgetting God the moment things got comfortable. Every rescuer treated the symptom. Not one of them could touch the disease. Second, you have a cycle too. You do. The names are different. It might be an anger you keep swearing off, a habit you keep burying and digging back up, a relationship you keep walking back into. But the shape is the same. Sin, suffering, crying out, rescue, forgetting. And the first step out of any spiral is the one thing Israel could never do for 300 years. To see it clearly, and to stop pretending this time you will fix it on your own. And third, this is the one I want you to carry out the door. The whole book is trying to make you feel one absence. Over and over in the darkest chapters, a single line keeps returning. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. No king. That is not just a political note. It is a cry. Every broken rescuer, every failed judge, every trip around that spiral was the sound of a people aching for a king who would not die after 40 years. A king who would not build an idol, would not break his vow, would not go blind in the dark. A rescuer who could finally reach the heart and not just the enemy at the gate. The book of Judges ends without him, but it ends leaning toward him. Every one of these broken deliverers is a hand pointing forward, saying, not this one, not yet, but he is coming. So let me ask you what I promised I would. Which judge felt the most like you? The coward hiding in the winepress, the outcast nobody wanted until they needed him, or the one who had everything, every gift, every advantage, God's own hand, and threw it away for the thing he could not put down? Tell me below. I read them. And that man in the dark, turning the millstone where we began, remember how his story actually ended. His hair grew back. He prayed one last broken prayer. And the God he had wasted his whole life answered him anyway. That is the God underneath every page of this terrible, beautiful book. Not the strength of the rescuers, the mercy of the one who kept sending them, all the way down and all the way to the end.